I can get from here to there faster than you. This is what success in most sports boils down to, regardless of whether we're considering a tailback in football who's sweeping around the end or a baseball player who's trying to beat out an infield hit. The most basic component for success in any sport is the ability to beat your opponent to a specific spot on the field or court. The skill that allows an athlete to win these little battles is known as acceleration. Athletes use acceleration when they cover distances up to about 20 yards long. Any distance longer than 20 yards gets into another skill known as top speed, which will be covered in the next section. Because the majority of crucial plays made in team sports all take place within about 20 yards or less, we consider the skill of acceleration to be the most important weapon an athlete can take into competition. The goal of the training presented on the Turbo Athletes video series is to teach an athlete to accelerate as quickly as possible and then recover fast enough so they can do it over and over again. To improve an athlete's acceleration, the first area we attack is their upper body. Athletes that learn to use proper upper body sprint mechanics will tap into a tremendous source of explosive speed. When addressing upper body mechanics, we emphasize 2 points. First, the elbow must be kept in a 90-degree bend or an L position. As the arm fires forwards and backwards, it never opens or closes from this L position. All movement originates from rotation at the shoulder. You will notice that Renice is using tech bands on her arms to help her concentrate on her mechanics. The tech bands, which are in fact just fat rubber bands, will remain in place as long as her arms stay bent at 90 degrees. If she were to deviate from this positioning, the tech bands would pop off and immediately alert her to her error. Second, the most important motion the arm goes through during sprinting is not the forward swing, but rather the backwards thrust of the elbow. We refer to this as the hammer and nail concept. Athletes should visualize their elbow to be a hammer that drives backwards and upwards to pound a nail into a board. Oftentimes we have a partner offer their hands as targets for the athlete to pound into. This gives the athlete immediate feedback on the placement of their elbows and on the force they are generating. Incorrect use of the upper body during sprinting is a very common problem among athletes of all ages. A young athlete that is able to learn the use of proper mechanics will reap significant and immediate long-term benefits. Once an athlete has become comfortable with the hammer and nail drill, we then have them perform an exercise called pause runs. As mentioned previously, rhythm and synchronization between the upper and lower body is of utmost importance for swift, explosive sprinting. In this exercise, Renice simply jogs in place and uses correct upper body mechanics. As her left elbow fires backwards, her left knee fires forward. This is the rhythm that must be maintained at all times when sprinting. Any deviation is inefficient and incorrect. At random intervals, I am giving Renice a stop command. On this command, she must pause and demonstrate that she is using proper positioning and synchronization between her upper and lower body, and that she is balanced enough to hold it. This exercise forces the athlete to be acutely aware of their technique at all times. It is very challenging for beginners and is a great teaching tool. As an athlete accelerates out of a stop position, they must get as much of their body weight projected forward as quickly as possible. This is also known as a sprinter's lean. To help our athletes get used to running with a slight forward lean, we have them perform Frankenstein runs. Frankenstein runs simply involve having the athlete sprint 10 to 20 yards with their arms extended as far in front as possible. We instruct them to keep their hands even with their eyes and to keep their arms from bouncing around. By extending their arms, the athletes are pulled into just the right amount of forward lean. Drop starts is a drill that further teaches an athlete to run with a slight forward lean and to quickly synchronize the upper and lower body. To begin this drill, we place the athlete with feet together in a perfectly upright position. The instructor then places his hands on the athlete's chest or shoulders and supports the athlete as he leans forward to about a 45-degree angle. The athlete must keep a straight line from his heels to the top of his head at all times and may not bend at the waist. The instructor will say, "Ready," and then may drop the athlete at any time. The athlete then quickly accelerates out for about 10 yards. As the coach moves out of the way, the tendency will be for the athlete to fall flat on their face. The only way for the athlete to prevent this nosedive is to accelerate forward. By maintaining their lean and quickly getting their upper and lower body to fire in sync, the athlete will be able to achieve swift and efficient acceleration. As an athlete becomes more comfortable with proper upper body mechanics, we begin adding the resistance of hand weights. In this demonstration, Renice is holding a 1.5 pound weight in either hand. She will fire her arms through their proper motion 8 to 10 times each, and then drop the hand weights and immediately repeat without the weights. Even with the addition of the hand weights, you will notice that Renice's mechanics remain perfect. She maintains a 90-degree bend at her elbow, everything rotates from her shoulder, and she does an outstanding job of hammering her elbow backwards and upwards. In this version of the drill, Ruffin holds a weight in each hand and fires through proper arm mechanics while in place. After he has performed 8 to 10 repetitions on each arm, he drops the weights and immediately sprints 10 yards. The idea behind this version is to force the upper and lower body to fall into sync as quickly as possible during the sprint. After dropping the weights, the arms experience the sensation of moving faster than normal, while the legs are forced to quickly generate speed and catch up after having been still for the first part of the drill. In the third version of the hand weight drop, we can instruct the athlete to begin the sprint while holding the hand weights and then dropping them at the halfway mark. This is our favorite version of the exercise because the athlete must concentrate so hard on generating speed in the upper body through the resistance of the hand weights just to keep up with the lower body. When the hand weights are dropped, the athlete's arms fire faster and they experience a turbo boost for the last half of the sprint. When you have an athlete perform this exercise or any other that involves hand weights, make sure they continue to use proper arm mechanics. A common mistake is for an athlete to pick up a pair of hand weights and then fail to use their arms until after they have dropped the weights. Remember, the focus should always be on that elbow firing backwards. Let goes work off the same principle as hand weight drops, except that resistance is applied to the entire body rather than just the arms. Let goes involve the use of a belt or harness to apply resistance to an athlete for the first half of a sprint, and then letting them run free for the second half of the sprint. The quick transition from a resisted sprint to free sprint at the halfway mark gives the athlete the momentary sensation of gaining speed and falling forward. In order to deal with this sensation and not end up flat on their face, the athlete must accelerate forward by forcing their arms and legs to turn over faster, all while maintaining perfect rhythm and control. You will also notice that as our athletes are accelerating, their feet are contacting the ground behind their hips. This is another important characteristic of proper acceleration technique. When athletes accelerate, they are essentially pushing themselves into motion. If an athlete's feet are not contacting the ground behind their hips, then they are not applying maximum force to the ground and will not accelerate to their full potential. One of our athletes' favorite exercises for acceleration includes any one of our many versions of tennis ball drops. For this exercise, you will need 2 relatively new tennis balls and a hard surface. We begin by placing Dalton on a starting line and then placing our instructor Rusty approximately 6 feet in front. As Rusty extends his arms and holds a tennis ball in either hand, Dalton remains ready and stares at Rusty's chin. When Rusty drops one of the balls, Dalton must locate the ball out of his peripheral vision, accelerate to the ball, and catch it before it hits the ground a second time. If the athlete is able to successfully retrieve the ball, then the instructor will take a half step backwards and go again. We will continue to repeat this process until the athlete fails twice at a distance. Obviously, the better the athlete gets at accelerating, the larger the starting distance will be. The exact same drill can be conducted with the athlete starting in a sideways stance. This makes the exercise more challenging because the athlete must be able to snap their hips and shoulders around and square up to the ball before they can really begin to accelerate. As with all lateral drills, make sure your athlete performs equal repetitions facing both directions. Another version of tennis ball drops would be to have the athlete start backwards as Andre is doing here. This version is set up in the same basic way as the others, except that the athlete will react off a verbal command by the instructor rather than the movement of the ball being dropped. The instructor will say "now" at the exact time the ball is dropped. On this command, the athlete will quickly turn around, locate the ball that was dropped, and then run it down. Because of the added difficulty in this drill, you also likely need to place the instructor a little closer to the athlete. In this final version of tennis ball drops, we place Andre in a position where he backpedals away from Taboris. Andre continues to backpedal until he sees Taboris drop one of the balls. At that moment, Andre then quickly stops, changes direction, and accelerates forward after the drop ball. The next several exercises involve variations of a game we call tag sprints. Here Troy is working with Daphne and Bethany on a basic tag sprint. In this setup, Daphne starts in an upright position and Bethany starts 5 yards in front in a seated position. When Troy claps his hands, Bethany will attempt to sprint past the cone 7 yards in front of her before Daphne can run her down and tag her back. This is such an excellent exercise for acceleration skills because it allows the athletes to concentrate on the game being played rather than the tremendous amount of work being performed. Tag sprints can be made more challenging by adjusting any number of variables. Here Troy has made the exercise more difficult for Daphne by forcing her to start in a backwards position. Another slight variation would be to have the lead athlete start in the up position of a push-up. Also, regardless of which configuration you're using, it is important to have your athletes swap their starting positions so they may work as both the chaser and the chasee. Because Sean and Andre are both excellent athletes and veterans of this style of training, Troy has made the drill even more challenging by adding a pair of the hand weights shown earlier. In this variation, Andre is required to sprint with the hand weights until he passes Troy. At that point, he may drop the hand weights and continue unimpeded in his sprint after Sean. The let-goes demonstrated earlier can also be incorporated into games of tag sprints. Here Troy is resisting Sean for the first few steps of his sprint. This places Sean at a significant disadvantage, just as the hand weights did to Andre in the last variation. A key point in conducting tag sprints is to make sure that each race is a photo finish. In other words, make sure your athlete's starting points give them both equal chances to win. Take each athlete's ability into consideration and, if necessary, adjust the starting positions after each repetition until you get it right. An excellent way to improve an athlete's acceleration skills is with a technique called assisted sprinting. Assisted sprinting is considered anything that forces an athlete to run faster than normal. Here Taboris is using a device known as a Viper to assist Adam through his sprints. Taboris and Adam start at about 6 yards of separation in order to build up tension on the Viper's flexible rubber cord. As soon as Taboris begins sprinting, Adam sprints after him. The Viper essentially acts as a giant rubber band that snaps Adam through his 10-yard sprint faster than he could otherwise run. By using assisted sprinting, Adam will learn to operate efficiently at higher speeds, and his body and brain will come to expect these speeds even in normal conditions where the Viper is not present. Going back to our game of tag sprints, we can create yet another variation by adding the assistance of the Viper. Here Adam is placed in a starting position just out of Andre's reach. As soon as Taboris yells go, Adam uses the advantage of the Viper's assistance to try to sprint past the finish line before Andre can make the tag. It is important to point out that regardless of what acceleration game we have our athletes perform, we always have one eye on their technique. If needed, we will stop the game and remind our athletes to fire their elbows backwards, to run with a lean, to keep their heels off the ground, or to keep a straight line from their heels to the top of their heads. It is important that they have fun while playing these games, but it is equally important that they form good habits in the process. After all, these habits could have a significant effect on the rest of their athletic careers.